I'm Scott Al Miller. It's the 3rd of January, 2024. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Today I had a number of people over the past few weeks mentioning just how Catholic Nicaragua is, and this begs an important question. How Catholic is Nicaragua? We're going to be talking about that and looking at some of the numbers on today's show. One of the hardest things in addressing a question like how Catholic is Nicaragua is first we have to answer the question of what does it even mean to be Catholic? How do you count someone? If you know some person and you know much about them, how do you determine if they are Catholic? If we back up a little bit and talk about the question of who is religious or who is Christian, this becomes a very difficult to define issue. People have very differing definitions of what it means to be Christian or Catholic or anything else. Within those religions, often there is disputes between different denominations or different groups about whether other people qualify as things. So even within religions themselves, it becomes very difficult many times to identify what people mean as being a member of that group. And if we're talking about religious groups, specifically like these, we have bigger complications, not just, well, do Baptists believe that Catholics are Christian? Do all Catholics see other Catholics as being Catholic? What does it mean to be Catholic? What is the definition? Because we have a number of questions. Even if you don't want to get involved in any of those discussions, you still have a number of things you need to consider. For example, is someone religiously Catholic? Do they participate in the church? Do they participate but don't believe? Do they believe but not participate? Do they identify as Catholic from a familial perspective or a cultural perspective but not a religious one? Many people refer to being Catholic as simply being from a region that is Catholic or that identifies as Catholic rather than actually being a part of a church or believing with the religion or in any other way associating with it. So this gets really complicated. Even if you ask people to self-identify and you believe them to be honest, it still leaves us with a great deal of, but what does it mean? There's no way to survey this, there's no way to observe this, and even the churches themselves often struggle with identifying which of their members believe, participate, identify culturally or not. Many people also participate but don't identify culturally, but feel that it's important for their jobs, their careers, their social circle, or it just makes family happy. So we have a starting point of no one, not the Catholic Church, not the census, absolutely nobody can positively identify what a Catholic is or who is or is not Catholic. Everyone will have a different definition of this. Everyone will have a different way of collecting the information, and the information always depends on some amount of self-identification. Even if we use the most viable methodology that we don't have to ask people and simply do a census of how many people attend Catholic services, we still have the problem of identifying which Catholic services we're going to count, how often you have to go to qualify, what about people who just stopped in to check it out or went because it's a cultural experience or do it because it's a holiday, it's things you do. If you were to count those people, for example, I would be considered Catholic because I attend festivals with the Catholic churches. Sometimes I go to events inside the Catholic churches. I live in a country that identifies as Catholic on a global scale, so all those things could easily make me identify as Catholic even though I am in no way Catholic. So that can be very confusing and difficult. I also have the complication that I work with the Catholic Church. I am the head of IT for a monastery. So those kinds of things can be very convoluted, very much a gray area. It's not dissimilar to when I lived in New Jersey, but New Jersey didn't consider me to be Jersey enough to qualify as a Jersen. They required that I stayed a New Yorker, even though I didn't live in New York. I did work in New York sometimes, but I worked in Jersey more often. I lived in Jersey. My car was in Jersey. My dog was in Jersey. My wife was in Jersey. My entire life was in New Jersey, but I sent my credit card statements to my address in New York. It wasn't my address in New York, but it was a mailing address I could use in New York because that's where my mail was handled by my father. And that was enough that New Jersey said, nope, you can't move to New Jersey. You don't qualify. Made no sense whatsoever, but my taxes went to New York instead of New Jersey. I don't care. But those kinds of things get really convoluted at times, and when it comes to religion, nothing is more complicated. And even within a population of people who attend church and profess to believing all the time, you'll often find there's someone who later it comes out that they never did believe and they were just going along because it's their group of friends or whatever, and they wanted to fit in or participate or just be seen as part of the group. Or some people are just followers and they will go with the crowd no matter where they go, and they don't really care. Do those people get counted? Should they be counted? Are they passionate about things? Will they vote based on those things? We don't know, right? All of this is a very, very difficult concept to even talk about. So, understanding that all numbers are very, very confusing and generally meaningless. One thing we can hypothesize pretty accurately, and that is that the number of people that are perceived to be and self-report as being a member of a group is vastly larger than the number of people that actually are. Essentially, all people, not 100%, but essentially all people who are actually members of the Catholic Church are going to identify as Catholic on their census, except for in regions where you have persecution and people are intentionally hiding the fact that they're Catholic, which will generally only be in places like the Middle East, where you have percentages of Catholics that are absolutely tiny, and only in places where those roles are public and not private. Well, you even have a concern that someone may not self-identify. And even in those cases, many times they do, because identifying is how they help get recognition and get protection. It's extremely rare in a religious situation where someone won't self-identify as part of their religion, especially one like Catholicism that has such unbelievable worldwide backing and recognition and protections and resources. So we can assume with great safety that the number of people who report as Catholic will include essentially all people who are religiously Catholic. It'll include many people who are casually Catholic. It'll include quite a few people who are culturally Catholic, who perceive themselves with Catholicism as being a part of their tradition. It will include some people who simply see Catholicism as being an identifier for their race or class or place in society or nation or region, along with others who get swept up in the system. So whether, the place where it gets really difficult is, do the rolls represent, does the census of people represent 5% more than we would consider to be truly Catholic, 10% more, 50% more? All those numbers are realistic. We really don't know, and there's no way to know. Okay, with the ambiguity established, if you look at the census numbers, both the censuses, taken by the country here in Nicaragua and by the Catholic Church on a global scale, a couple of things stand out. One is that Nicaragua is the most Catholic of the CA4. That's Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, the four countries that tend to act together and have the most cultural affinity within the region. That is setting them apart slightly from Costa Rica and Panama, who are in most ways very similar, but not as similar as the Northern Four, as the CA4. They have different international relations a bit. They have a little bit of different cultural aspects, and so they both identify as a bit more Catholic than the CA4. The CA4 stands out as the least Catholic region in all of Latin America. Now, it's important to understand Latin America is considered by every source to be the most Catholic region in the world. The majority, the largest group of Catholics worldwide come from Latin America. Not too long ago, 100 years ago, those same censuses pushed Europe as by far the most Catholic region. So that's a big shift in the last 100 years. And Latin America now leads by no small amount. So we already are in a very Catholic region. You're going to see a lot of Catholicism for a lot of reasons. But in Central America, especially the CA4, you see a very big drop compared to the outside world. Like Mexico is self-identifying around 80% Catholic. I think Panama is in like the high 60s, like 67%. Costa Rica, I think, is like 56%. And then most of the CA4 are in the 30s or 40s, with Nicaragua being the #1 self-identifying Catholic nation in the country, in the region, at 43% Catholic. Now, that puts Catholicism as the #1 self-identified religion in the country, but it is not the majority of people. So it, in this region, in the entire CA4, you cannot refer to these as Catholic countries. They may be Catholic leading countries, but they are not Catholic countries. The average person is not identifying as Catholic, and if the average person is not, that suggests that the number of people who actually are not is much closer to 80%, depending on how you want to define it. If you look at the census data over the decades decades, what you see is a consistent story, and I'm sure this plays out in many countries in the region, where the identifying percentage of the population as being Catholic has dropped steadily over a period of half a century or so. And this is something that we expect to see worldwide. Globally, the population is becoming more secular. People who are gravitating towards traditional religious constructs is reducing all over the world, but especially in like Europe and North and South America. And so that we're seeing a decrease in the Catholic Church is mirrored across many religious groups. It's not specific to being Catholic, but here in Nicaragua, where Catholicism was the leading religion traditionally, it's still the leading one, but where it was a Catholic country at some point in the past, it has been declining over a number of years and has not been a Catholic country for quite a while now, 20, 30, maybe 40 years. It's also important to note, a lot of people perceive Nicaragua and countries in the region, Guatemala for example, as being Catholic because Catholic architecture and the history of the Catholic Church lies all around them. It is important to remember that these countries are colonies. 500 years ago, in fact, the city that I'm in right now is celebrating 500 years this year, along with Granada. Nicaragua, we are the two oldest cities in the Spanish Main. This is, in the region, we are the absolute first incorporated cities of the Spanish Empire, so that is a major milestone. But 500 years ago, when Spain colonized this region, one of the ways that they did so was by pushing religion on the people, and this was partially done through missionaries, partially done through building cathedrals. We have an amazing cathedral here in Leon. They did so through schools and all kinds of constructs. And so as you spend time here, you will see that there are the structures, the remnants of a colonial religious heritage everywhere in the country. It is practically defining of the way that cities are laid out, to the way that roads go, where the city centers are, all kinds of things are based around that Catholic heritage. And this brings a couple important points. One is that if you simply look at a colonial country like Nicaragua, who has not gone and torn down all those old buildings, they've not burned them down, they've not removed them, there is a heritage of their colonial era that still exists. And that makes it look a lot more Catholic than it actually is. Many of these buildings are lightly used, some are abandoned, some are no longer safe. Some, like in Managua, the National Cathedral has been destroyed by earthquake. So there's a lot of reasons why you may not see those structures still in use today, but by and large, they represent a colonial past and they represent a colonization process. Religion was a tool of colonization and remains worldwide a tool of colonization. And so that is important to remember, that this, from a cultural aspect throughout this region, the existence of a Catholic heritage also represents foreign imperialism and colonialism. This was not always seen as purely a religious thing, because it was very political at the time that it came here. It did not come here under religious grounds. It came here under political ones and under military ones. And so a lot of those structures are not representative of Nicaragua as a culture historically. Also, because it was brought in as a military tool, as a forced tool in many cases, for a very long time. There were a lot of people who identified as being Catholic because it was scary not to be. It was part of survival in a colonial structure. Of course, for a lot of people, it was simply an opportunity to integrate into Spanish society, to have more upward mobility within the colonial infrastructure. But for some, it was literally about safety and protecting their families and staying out of harm's way by being seen as members of the Catholic Church, because those who were Catholic were not really eligible for execution or enslavement, but those who were not potentially were. And mileage varies at different times in history and in different regions, but there is a very strong history in the colonial Americas that many people portrayed themselves as being Catholic as a mark of trying to survive, so that the Catholic Church could not be used as an identifier as to who should and who should not be free or safe or alive. This means that there is a very strong history of people identifying as Catholic who are not, who may be not just not Catholic, but strongly anti-Catholic. That is a real thing and still exists quite a bit. People still become members of their churches or join organizations in the United States like the Lions or Rotary Club, right? They're not doing that generally out of a desire for some religious adherence. They're generally doing it because it provides upward mobility and connections and business opportunities. And those things make sense in many cases. That's how religion has often been used. But to then look at a country and try to determine what its religious rate is misleading, because it is easy for the majority of people who are members of local churches or groups like that may have absolutely no desire or belief within their religious structure in any way whatsoever. So what we know with a great degree of certainty is that Nicaragua is not a Catholic country, and it does have a lot of Catholics, but those Catholics do not represent the majority of society. And over time, and I've talked to people specifically about this, and they say it's very tangible, it's very palpable, the decrease in religious rate in general, not just Catholic, but in general. There was 30 to 40 years ago, when my generation were children and when the millennials were young, that there was a very strong tradition of people attending church, that religion was a big part of everyday life here in Nicaragua and of course in many parts of the world, and that during this time, over the last 30 to 40 years, it has been incredibly noticeable that the generations that are now in their main working ages, right, be 20 to 50, 60 years old, there has been a marked decrease in church attendance, in religious adherence, in admission to beliefs at all. The rise of secular culture has become very strong here and around the world. We see that very strongly in Europe. We see that very strongly in North America, and we see it very strongly in Latin America. It's playing out within large regions very strongly. A move towards science and reason-based expectations in society, and the idea that you have to attend things owned by large corporations in order to qualify as part of a religion. Even those people who are very religious are moving away from the organized and corporate religious structures in many cases. So we're seeing a very big change from the viewpoint of the people who are living through it, absolutely. And so what we're seeing in census numbers is playing out very strongly in what we're seeing in on-the-ground conversations with people. And you see it everywhere. You can go to small communities and churches that you assume must have been full in the past, that it seems absolutely clear that these were vibrant community centers long ago, now are empty. Very, very few people are attending them. They're struggling to find priests, or in the case of one of our local churches here, it is no longer there. We also see, even since 2015, you can really see the incredible increase in the number of non-Catholic churches in Protestant and even fringe churches. Those that are neither Catholic nor Protestant are springing up all over the place. You see them in many communities, and even though the overall religious rate of the country is dropping slightly, the rise of alternative religions has come very strongly, and that means that the majority of those are not coming from people who were not, or groups that were not religious previously. They're coming from groups that were Catholic previously, because Catholicism represented a much larger piece of the pie. The pie is shrinking, but the Catholic piece of that pie is shrinking much faster than the pie itself. It's also another point that's worth noting, and this is, I think, a little bit more true up north in Guatemala, for example, where the indigenous culture is much stronger, much larger, and has a more cohesive tradition, partially because of the size of the culture. But there are many indigenous religious beliefs that still exist within these countries, and this is true worldwide. Anywhere that new Western religions show up, almost never do they completely supplant existing religions. For example, when Catholicism went through northwestern Europe, it of course took on many aspects of traditional Celtic pagan beliefs and Norse pagan beliefs, and that's why we see so many names of religious festivals in Christianity, in Catholicism in that region, have religious names from paganism or traditions from paganism. That's so incredibly common there. We just expect it. We think nothing of it. And so the same thing happens here in Latin America, that old, especially animistic religions that were here previously, they stay. They don't get replaced. They become integrated. And this makes for another complicated conversation within the Catholic world, is when you blend Catholicism with another religion, is that still Catholicism? Is it still Christian? Once you recognize that the parent religion is not a religion, it's not the religious beliefs, but only a social construct to contain whatever beliefs were already there, how does that play into this? It becomes a very esoteric religious question. But when we're trying to talk about how religious is a country, or how Catholic specific is a country, North Americans, for example, would generally not consider a large percentage of the Catholics here in Nicaragua to be Catholic, right? North American Catholics have a tendency towards feeling that there is a small amount of allowance for traditional Northwestern European paganism, but only a small amount, not nearly as much as is granted leeway in Europe, but that the traditions that are here in Latin America don't have any historic tradition with Catholicism back before 500 years ago, and so are seen as new usurpers and not a legitimate part of the religion. So North American Catholics especially tend to see Central American Catholics as maybe being quite a bit fringe or not Catholic at all. And so even those that participate and pay homage and pay tithes and whatnot into the Catholic Church internationally doesn't mean that the Catholic Church internationally universally recognizes them as being Catholic necessarily. It is a complicated question that no one can answer. But these are all things you have to consider when you have so many people who come out and say, oh, but Nicaragua is a Catholic country. The Catholics run everything. Everybody's Catholic. It defines all these things. There's been many people who have posted things on my channel talking about specifically factors and things that should be considered because Nicaragua is Catholic. And that's absolutely not the case. Strongly Catholic, lots of Catholic heritage. The Catholicism plays a very important role. It is part of everyday life. You see it everywhere, but partially that's architecturally, partially that is in traditions. Many of the festivals have at least partially Catholic heritage, but many of the Catholic festivals also have pagan heritage here, right? There's a large number of the celebrations that go on here. Some of the local saints are not Catholic saints, right? Some of the things that they consider Catholic saints, they have sainted pagan gods as part of the religion, right? Which completely normal here. It's basically expected to be how Catholicism works around the world, but most regions, again, will argue that that's not Catholicism. We're getting into murky ground. As with any group of people anywhere in the world, whether it's a country or a cultural group or a racial group, you can't use a religion to define them. Just as not all Arabs in the world are Islamic, many of them are Christian, many of them are secular, many of them are who knows what. They can be anything they want. No one is forced into a religion because of where they are born. That is not how religion works. It's not how race or culture works. So that's not a thing, right? And so Nicaragua is no different. You can't define the people here as being Catholic because they're Nicaraguan. You can't even define the country as being primarily Catholic because of its history. It's just not the way it works. It is a vibrant country with many religions and many non-religious people and many religious people and many traditions that reflect religious heritage, but many that reflect non-Catholic religious heritage and many that reflect no religious heritage. And there's including processions that are anti-Catholic. Those exist as well. Not anti-church, but anti-colonial Catholicism exists as a very strong mantra here as well. All of those things exist. And so when you're looking at Nicaragua, yes, it's important to consider that Catholicism plays an important role, but it is also important to remember that it doesn't play the majority role. Not Catholic is by far, by no small degree, more prevalent than Catholic. Even if we go by the census numbers, 60% of the population is not Catholic. Only about 40% is Catholic. But if we go by what we assume are realistic readings of those numbers, about 80% of the country does not identify in the way that we think of Catholics, that they are not actually Catholics. They're just people who have some reason to kind of associate with them, and 20% at most, and that's a stretch in reality, really perceive themselves as being truly Catholic, that they actually believe in it, they actually participate in it, they actually believe in it to a point where they are willing to act in such a way that reflects that they believe. Right, and that's not to get into a religious discussion of what does it take in actions to reflect belief, but it's important to understand that there is no way someone truly believes in a religion and then does not act accordingly. That is a really simple way to read into whether faith exists. And this is something that is being discussed in the United States all the time. This is a standard thing that has been accepted across thousands of years of religious reading. It is, if you believe that fire is hot, you're not going to put your hand into it. People who reach into fires you can pretty safely believe they don't believe that the fire is hot, right? Action is based on what you believe, what you perceive as the world around you. So if you believe that any given religion is true, you will actively do what you believe is the beliefs of that religion, right? Within reason. And so you can see by the population that the belief rate is not that high. There's certainly a noticeable number of believers in the Catholic Church here in the country, but there is so much more of people who are very much seeing it just as a tradition that they adhere to, a culture that they identify with, a history that they don't want to give up. And that's strong. The number of people who do things because it is their family history, it is the way they grew up, right? Think about the number of people who put up a Christmas tree and decorate it and celebrate Santa Claus, right? We don't do those things because we actually believe that the Christmas tree pagan tradition is important religiously. We don't do that because decorating is an important religious adherence. We don't do that because Santa Claus is a special religious figure. We do those things because it's how we grew up. We feel good. It makes us feel warm. It is a tradition that we enjoy, that connects us to our past, that connects us to previous generations. And so there is a very, very significant percentage of people in every religious group worldwide who choose to participate and act as a member of that group because it ties them to their community, to their parents, to their heritage, to their country, to whatever. They feel those connections, and that is an extremely common behavior in religious groups. And so we expect, when we see 43% in the past, it's probably lower now, identifying as being Catholic, probably the majority are doing it for that reason, and that is what they perceive Catholicism as, and they perceive other people who are participating in that as being the same, right? Well, they're Catholic, and that means that they feel this affinity towards this heritage. They still want to put up a Christmas tree. They still want to celebrate Easter. They still want to have this procession of Mary screaming at the volcano. These are all things that we perceive as being Catholic when you're here in Nicaragua. And I want to connect with other people who perceive that, and probably all of us have the same. It's cultural, it's historical, it's heritage. And once you start having that, you have a lot of this worldwide, right? A lot of pagan beliefs in Northwestern Europe. Very, very few people actually still have active pagan religious beliefs. And yet, so many people, for example, still knock on wood. So many people still throw salt over their shoulder. These are pagan religious beliefs that have carried through as part of heritage for many generations, thousands of years of no longer being an active religious construct, have remained as part of culture. And so that is what we're seeing actively happening here. The teardown of the old institutions is happening rapidly, but so much of the heritage is remaining and will be expected to remain for hundreds or thousands of years. Even though it's only been here for 500 years, it will still be here for a very long time to come because it's become so embedded in the culture, in the feeling, in the heritage of the country and the region and its place in the world, and it's part of how people identify as a group versus being a member of another group. Thank you for joining me. As always, get down in those comments, like and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Add your comments, add your questions, all that stuff. Sorry that I'm static today in not the most exciting location. My car is in the shop and I was unable to travel. I really wanted to film this in front of a whole bunch of Catholic churches and give you real shots of the architecture here in León, because there's 17 amazing Catholic churches here. If you're into Catholic architecture and history, we're a great city for that. So is Granada. We're the two absolute best, both celebrating 500 years. Check them out if you want to see amazing cathedrals and churches and sanctuaries and monasteries and all that. There's so much cool stuff to see if you're into that history. But I didn't get to do that for this show. I will get it on future shows. I am going to do quite a bit of filming around León. Just today, I wasn't able to get out and about, so I didn't know the car was going to be in the shop. So I apologize for that. I am working hard on that. Thanks for joining me. Remember to post on social media, tell your friends about the show, and I will see all of you tomorrow.